Alright, we are back with a new video, and today we are back updating the Big Brother 24 power rankings towards the end of week 3. I am recording this on Tuesday, July 26th, and this was quite the week to go over here, and definitely one of the more pleasantly surprising weeks in terms of feeds, and actually one that kind of reminds me a lot of the Kyle HOH from BB Can 10, where on the offset, this definitely felt like it could have been a really boring week with a very predictable outcome. And given how bad the twist ended up being, there's a good chance that it could have actually killed the game and whatever momentum it had going for it, coming into it. But it actually turned out to be a pretty strong week despite all the things going against it. And obviously, through that, there's quite a bit of movement to talk about here and quite a bit of new developments to discuss here, which obviously will be reflected in these power rankings. But as usual, I'll be ranking each of the players left in the game based on how likely it is that they'll win, based on their current game position and where I think they're going from this point. And let's get right into the list. So starting off at number 15, we have the boot from the last week, and here we have Pooch. And obviously, this was to be expected. It ended up being a unanimous 12-0 vote, and from what we saw, it seemed to be a genuine blindside as well, where despite his allies being included on the vote and obviously jumping on to avoid sticking out, Pooch himself was pretty much left in the dark and was blindsided at the end of the day. And as we talked about in last week's ranking, he pretty much done this to himself. I mean, he volunteered himself to go on the block specifically to backdoor Taylor, which felt pretty unnecessary at the end of the day, and just opened up the door for him to be taken out. Now, admittedly, even if he hadn't done that, I felt like he would have been a prime target sooner rather than later anyway, not so much due to his comp ability, but more so because he definitely was someone who was out in front and definitely would have been a target moving forward had someone like a Jasmine or an Amira won HOH. So to see him go out here, not too surprising. And because of that, he is here at number 15. And with that, there are 14 players left in the game. And as usual, I'll be ranking them based on how likely it is that they'll win the game from this point. But at number 14, the player I believe is the least likely to win from this point is the person who I believe is the most likely boot coming into Thursday night's eviction. And here we have Amira. And this was a pretty fun downfall for Amira here, where she came into the week seemingly in a pretty strong position, where she was technically the leader of these Girls Alliance, which really wasn't a thing by this point. However, she was also a pretty central piece within the Old School Alliance as well as Post Pack, which was set to dominate the game coming into this Festy Bessie twist, where the members of Post Pack basically made it so that each of their members was partnered up with someone who is outside of Post Pack. So that way, if any of them had ended up on the block, that they would have had the numbers to stay, so long as they decide to remain together as an alliance. This alliance definitely had the potential to ride its way to jury uninterrupted. And obviously, Mira herself was aligned with Terrance, who, yes, was a member of the Old School Alliance, but was also excluded from Post Pack and definitely would have been voted out had Post Pack had the numbers there. But obviously, through them being in such a power position, we see Kyle really come to a lot of the outsiders here and convince a lot of them to form this new alliance, the Leftovers. And through them getting Turner on board, it basically set up Amira to be backdoored here, and it was a pretty fun blindside at the end of the day. Now, I will say that Amira was a mostly competent player, with her being in a good position early on. However, she definitely made herself too big of a threat, where for whatever reason, she would always check in with people outside of her alliance anytime they talked with someone within the alliance as a way of sort of checking in with them. And it was so blatant of a display here to where people recognized that she was being overly controlling and someone who was trying to micromanage her relationships, that made it so that she was targeted as early as she was. So I definitely understand why she eventually emerged as a big threat. She didn't manage her perception super well. And yes, there is a possibility there being a split house. There is a chance that she could try to pull the numbers to stay. However, if we're looking at the actual votes right now, it's not looking super encouraging. Obviously, you have most of the leftovers being able to vote here. And even people like Daniel and Nicole are thinking about voting her out, despite them being a part of the Old School Alliance, given their relationship with Terrance. So it's not looking too great for her. And while there is a non-zero chance that she ends up staying, it's not looking great. She is the target, and there's a chance she could be blindsided on Thursday night. So because of that, I can definitely see her going out. And because of that, I do have her at the bottom here at number 14. Now we're moving on to number 13, and we have another member of the Old School Alliance, and here we have Daniel. And it's sort of weird that I have Daniel this low, as obviously he is not currently on the block. However, he is someone who has been talked about as a potential next target by a lot of people within the leftovers. I mean, we hear Taylor say that she wants to go after him next week. And obviously, after the veto ceremony, it turns out that a lot of people no longer trust Daniel as much as they do, largely because it seemed like Turner talked to Daniel right before the veto ceremony. That caused a lot of people to suspect that Daniel knew about the plan to backdoor Mir before the veto. And while that technically isn't the case, as Turner wasn't able to get it out, is definitely contributed to Daniel being in a weaker position moving forward. There's also the perception that Daniel is a bigger competition threat than someone like a Nicole, who, again, is another potential target moving forward. And I wouldn't be surprised that Daniel ends up being targeted next week if someone in the leftovers wins HOH and they end up sticking together. So it's not looking too great for Daniel, and that is a big reason that he is as low as he is. Now, granted, there is a possibility that he ends up winning HOH or someone within his alliance ends up saying and he's able to recover. However, it's not looking great for him right now, and because of that, he is here at number 13. Now we're moving on to number 12, and we actually have the other person on the block right now, and here we have Terrance. And I actually did consider putting Terrance one spot lower, kind of where Daniel is, as he is on the block right now, and there is a non-zero chance that he ends up going home, and there's actually a pretty real chance that he gets eviction votes on Thursday night. So it's not looking too great for him, and even if he survives the vote, he will technically be in the minority, and I don't really see him being included in the majority per se unless things really shift for him, and I don't see him being too active within the game to really do that, so there's that to consider. Now, I do think there are definitely outs for him, like he still has Daniel and Nicole. There are definitely people that are willing to protect him. He kind of has a relationship with Joseph as well, as he gave him a pep talk earlier yesterday, trying to convince him to fight to stay, so I guess there's that to a degree. And of course, if he ends up staying, I mean, there is a chance he could get some sort of immunity or a power. I mean, we don't have confirmation yet what will happen to the surviving bestie on eviction night, but yeah, like that's at least a possibility for him. So there are definitely outs for Terrance, and there are definitely ways in which he can improve his position. However, I don't feel super confident with him at the end of the day. And plus, with him on the block, there is technically a chance he goes home on Thursday night. So because of that, I do have him here at number 12. Now we're moving on to number 11, and we have another person who has largely been on the out so far. And here we have Indy. And the thing about Indy is she isn't really a part of any alliance. I mean, she's technically affiliated with the post pack / old school contingent. However, even then, she's not really a part of that alliance, and she doesn't really have many core relationships within that group, so that's not particularly great. And similar to how I felt about her in early weeks, she's definitely one of the more expendable players in the game, where I could definitely see her like definitely being dragged along in the game to where she probably doesn't garner too much respect. I could see her being an easy target in a future week, assuming things go wrong. And even outside of that, even with the people she's technically aligned with, I mean, they aren't that close to her. I mean, Jasmine blamed her after the veto ceremony because she was seen as the bigger bully against Taylor, something that Turner talked a lot about in his veto speech, and felt like that Indy should have been backdoored instead. So that's definitely not great for Indy's perspective. And again, I feel like she's someone who could go either way. She could either be picked off as an easy target, someone who could be dragged along and probably not win at the end. And I feel like she hasn't really been super active as well. She's still kind of a background player within the actual game, so that's not particularly great for me. So I can't have her too high. However, considering the fact that there are other people who are more likely to go home sooner than her, I do have her a couple spots higher, and she's here at number 11. Now we're moving on to number 10, and we have another person within the old school alliance, and here we have Nicole. And obviously, this was a pretty terrible week for Nicole, where, again, it seems like she's about to lose one of her closest allies in Amira. Obviously, another one of her allies in Daniel, someone who isn't entirely safe moving forward. And in general, she herself is someone who isn't looked in the most favorable light right now, where obviously she threw the veto in order to try to get Taylor backdoored, only for that to backfire. And even with Daniel being the priority target, there is a non-zero chance that someone from the leftovers could end up back targeting her if they ended up winning HOH. So it's not as if she's entirely safe per se. However, the main reason I have her this high, relatively speaking, is that, again, Daniel is more likely to be targeted over her, and I feel like she definitely has more potential to move up within the game if things were to go her way. I don't feel like she's entirely out of the game yet, per se. Although I will say she hasn't handled the whole Amira backdoor super well. She's definitely gotten pretty emotional about it. She's definitely gotten into some arguments with some people as well. So she doesn't look super great coming out of that. However, again, the fact that she has potential to move up moving forward is enough to leave her here at number 10. Now we're moving on to number 9, and we actually have the first member of the newly formed Leftovers Alliance, and here we have Taylor. And admittedly, I feel like Taylor's position has improved quite a bit over the course of this week, where obviously she came in as what seemed to be a consensus backdoor target, where Jasmine was able to convince Turner that Taylor should be the backdoor target. And even now, like, there are plenty of people that still feel like she had at least somewhat of a role in the eventual Amira backdoor, although admittedly it's not as big as certain other people, so there's that. And she is in the majority alliance now, per se. She has sort of found a home for herself at this point due to a very fortunate competition result at the end of the day. So I feel like that is something in her credit, and I feel like she definitely has potential to move up. However, the main reason I don't have her higher here is that I feel like even with all this stuff, she hasn't been super active within the game. She was literally one of the last people to be included in the Leftovers Alliance. And while she definitely has allies that could take her deeper into the game, particularly people like a Michael or Brittany, I still feel like she is someone who could potentially be targeted in the future if things don't go her way. I could see her ending up on the block next to Nicole and through that getting some votes for eviction. So that's a bit of a concern. So I feel like she isn't entirely out of the woods yet. However, considering she is now in majority alliance, I feel like her position is vastly improved. And despite the odds seeming to be against her from early on the season, she is starting to find her place in the game. So I do have to at least acknowledge that, but it's those concerns moving forward that do lead me to put her here at number 9. Now we're moving on to number 8, and we have another player from the Old School Alliance, and here we have Jasmine. And I will say that Jasmine, like, despite her technically being on the outs and her not being in the best position right now, I do think there was some merit to the way she handled some of this week. Where, yeah, I mean, it's not great that after the veto, she ended up blaming Indy for a lot of the situation. And again, similar to Nicole, I don't think she handles the fallout of the Amira backdoor super well. However, early on in the week, she did technically get into Turner's ear. She was the one to tell him that, you know, like, Taylor would be the consensus target. And with Turner not being super willing to make a move on his own early on, he was definitely receptive to that. And I do think Jasmine at least deserves some credit for that. So there's that. And again, despite her being on the outs right now, I don't feel like she's being targeted anytime soon. I mean, especially with the fact that she really isn't going to be a factor in any physical competitions moving forward. I mean, who is going to be threatened by her per se? So I do think she has quite a bit of potential to get deeper into the game. Now, whether that will translate into effective gameplay remains to be seen, but I do think there's enough merit there to have her at least somewhat higher on this list here, but it's still not looking great for her right now, and because of that, she is here at number 8. Now we're moving on to number 7, and we're going back to another member of the newly formed Leftovers Alliance, and we actually have the current HOH, and here we have Turner. Now, Turner did benefit quite a lot from this HOH, and considering how close it was, the fact that it came down to mere seconds, it's sort of crazy that he ends up getting the HOH here right after being blindsided at the last eviction, and in turn having this opportunity to rebuild his game. And he does benefit quite a bit here with first, like, Kyle, Monty, and Joseph approaching him to form the Pound, and then later on, Michael and Brittany being pulled in. They're able to pull in Taylor as well, and they're able to form the Leftovers Alliance, which is able to pull off this impressive Amira backdoor. And it seems like they're about to break down the post-back alliance and potentially get into a stronger position moving forward. So that's a lot of benefits that Turner got through this HOH. However, he was also the least active in actually bringing that about, where coming into it, he was definitely a bit reluctant to shake things up despite him being on the outs. Jasmine was able to get into his ear early on and convince him that the house would be happy for him if he ends up backdooring Taylor instead, targeting her and really getting her out. And he was actually receptive to this and was willing to go through with it up until Kyle approached him and the other guys approached him as well to try to get him to actually make a move. And even then, like, he was pretty reluctant to do so, to where he wasn't willing to do it unless he knew he had the numbers. And obviously they were able to get the numbers, but even then, like, he seemed like the least active in doing so. So I feel like, yes, while Turner did benefit a lot in terms of him getting to a majority alliance, he wasn't really active in bringing it about. And on top of that, I mean, while the leftovers have been effective so far in staying under the radar, I feel like Turner is someone who could emerge as a big threat later on. I mean, both in the direct sense in that he was the one to get the blood on his hands by backdooring Amira in the first place, but also through him being perceived as this big competition threat. So I think those are factors that could lead to him being targeted over other members of the leftovers. And considering the fact that he wasn't super active in creating this new structure to begin with, I can't reward him too much. But I do have to acknowledge that he is at least in a better position now than he was last week. So because of that, he is here number 7. Now we're moving on to number 6, and we have another member of the Leftovers Alliance, and here we have Brittany. And the thing about Brittany is obviously she is someone who is still looked at as a bit of a target by a lot of the women in the house. They don't really trust her, largely due to her own actions in the first 2 weeks. And yes, she is brought into the Leftovers Alliance. However, I feel like a lot of that is due to her relationship with Michael. Obviously, her and Michael ended up on the block, and had the noms remained the same, she would have been the target there. So obviously, that's not great that she would have gone home had they not won the veto, and the noms stayed the same, so that's not particularly great. There's obviously the fact that the women still don't really trust her, and I feel like Brittany could be in a position to leak the alliance if push came to shove, so I feel like that's not particularly great. She hasn't demonstrated herself to be the best when it comes to handling information, so there's that to consider. And yes, while she does have a close relationship with Michael, I feel like that's pretty much the only thing that's connecting her to the rest of this group to her. If it's not for that, she's essentially on the outs per se. So that's not particularly great. And I feel like moving forward, she's definitely one of the people who could be targeted. And even if she gets to the end, I'm not super confident in her ability to make the moves that she needs to win the game. So it's not looking great for Brittany, but again, the big reason she is this high is because she is in the leftovers. And I feel like while, yeah, she isn't entirely safe, I feel like someone like a Taylor, possibly someone like a Turner could be targeted over her. So because of that, I do have her here at number 6. Now we're moving on to number 5, and we actually have the highest ranked member outside the Leftovers Alliance. But here we have Alyssa. And admittedly, I feel like Alyssa is sort of in a weird spot right now, where on one hand, she definitely has people that are mad at her due to stuff that happened after the Amira backdoor. They are upset at her that she was the one to go to Indy about potentially being targeted, and in turn, sort of kind of convincing Turner to go through with the plan. But again, a lot of it is just misunderstandings. And I feel like at the end of the day, it's probably not going to amount to too much. So I feel like there's that. And there's also her relationship with Kyle, where yes, it is sort of in a weird situation where she kind of wants a showmance with him, but he doesn't really want to let that dictate his game, but he still wants to get information from her. So it's sort of a weird situation, but I do feel like it is something that will at least allow her to get deeper into the game. I feel like Kyle isn't super incentivized to target her right now. And really, I feel like the leftovers themselves are not super incentivized to target her either, where even with the Bessie's twist, I mean, she is partnered with Indy to where if they end up on the block, I feel like Indy's probably going to go home over them. So I feel like through that, Alyssa's definitely in a good position, all things considered. But at the end of the day, she is still technically in the minority. She did just get blindsided here with this Amira backdoor. And I feel like through that, she's probably not in the best spot right now. However, I feel like other people outside the leftovers, she's probably the least likely to be targeted in the immediate future. She's obviously has a favorable matchup there if she were to go up on the block. And with her relationship with Kyle, I feel like that could allow her to get deeper into the game, but also something that could eventually prove to be a hindrance depending on where the showman storyline goes. So because of that, I do have her the highest ranked member of the post-pack group, but I can't really reward her too much outside of that. So because of that, she's here at number 5. Now we're moving on to number 4. And as I alluded to, the top 4 are all people within the Leftovers Alliance. It's just a matter of the order. But at number 4, we technically have the worst position person left within that group. But here we have Joseph. And I'll say that Joseph has technically been one of the more active people in creating the Leftovers Alliance as well as the Pound. I feel like a lot of that does stem from the fact that he had his birthday, he turned 25, and now he is a changed player and someone who's ready to play. So take that as you will. But in all seriousness, he was technically one of the more active people in approaching Turner about getting the numbers together to build a new alliance. He obviously gets included in the pound, which is something to his credit at least. And he does seem to be doing a good job as well as drawing suspicion away from himself. So that is something at least. And I feel like similar to Turner, he has improved his position quite a bit. And unlike Turner, I feel like Joseph, again, was more active in getting himself into this better position. But at the end of the day, I still feel like in the grand scheme of things, there are other people who are better positioned than him, people that are less likely to be targeted over him. And even within the Leftovers Alliance, I feel like Joseph is definitely sort of hanging out on his own. I mean, he is someone who, yes, is a member of the Pound, someone who is technically considered one of the big guys. However, he's also the only person that we haven't talked about left who doesn't have a final two right now, and I feel like that could definitely hinder him moving forward. The fact that it doesn't seem like he has much of an end game right now, so because of that, I can't reward him too highly. Although I do have to give him credit for getting himself into a better position and technically playing more than he did earlier on. So because of that, he is here number 4. Now moving on to number 3, and we have kind of a better version of Joseph right now in the sense that, again, he was a bit more active in creating the new alliance, but is also someone who is a bit better positioned right now. But here we have Monty. And I feel like Monty has done a pretty good job of repairing his game. I feel like, again, he has sort of been swinging back and forth here, where he technically ruined his game, but then he also kind of fixed it to a degree. Although I will say that even now, he's probably not in the ideal position. I feel like there are technically scenarios where he could be targeted, not next week, but definitely later on. So I feel like those are still concerns I have with Monty that keep him outside the top 2. However, again, similar to Joseph, he was someone who was active in approaching Turner earlier in the week, getting him to form the Pound and later this new majority alliance. So there's that. He obviously repaired his relationship with Taylor to a degree by bringing her into the HOH room so that she can be included in the Leftovers. So I feel like that's something to where Taylor's no longer going after him. She's going to go after Daniel first. So I feel like that's a credit you have to give to Monty as well. And he does technically have a final 2 with Kyle, so there's also that to a degree. However, again, I feel like he's probably not the best position in the game right now. And even then, there are definitely scenarios where he could be targeted in the near future. So because of that, I do have to leave him here in number 3. Now moving on to number 2. And for me, this was the pretty clear number 2. I feel like these two players are clearly in the best position within the game right now. And it's just a matter of the order. But at number 2, I did decide to go with Michael here. Now, I still think Michael is in a very solid position moving forward. I mean, he was brought into the Leftovers Alliance in large part due to his alliance with Kyle and Brittany there. I mean, Kyle was able to bring him very comfortably, so there's that. And with him being in the majority, that's obviously a pretty solid spot for him to be in. No one seems to be suspecting him of flipping. He was already included in Post Pack, so there's that as well. And even while he technically won his 3rd veto in a row this week, I mean, a lot of the attention seems to be on Brittany winning it as, well, Michael and Brittany technically won it together. So, and the focus is on Brittany as she would have been the target over Michael with them being on the block. So that is a lot of credit I can give to Michael there, with him still being in a solid position despite him being on the block earlier this week. So all those reasons are why he's still this high on the list. However, I feel like he wasn't as active in creating the Leftovers Alliance, and even within that configuration, I feel like he is not the best positioned right now within that majority alliance. So because of that, I can't put him all the way at number 1. And plus, again, he was on the block, and his competition ability is something that could still be discussed moving forward. So because of that, I did have to leave him here at number 2. And now, at number 1, the player I believe is the most likely to win Big Brother 24 right now is Kyle. And I had to say that if I had to give one person the most credit for creating the Leftovers Alliance, it's probably Kyle. I mean, Kyle was the one who got the information from Melissa that the Old School Alliance was being created and that he was left out of that. And despite him being part of Postpack and part of the scheme to be put up against people that would be voted out over him, that prompted Kyle to go to the guys and really try to create a counter to the Old School Alliance. And that caused him to get in with Turner and with Monty and with Joseph to create the Pound. And then he was able to pull in Michael through his relationship with him, along with Brittany, to where they're able to turn that into Leftovers, add Taylor on, they had the new majority. And I feel like through that, Kyle was not only the most active in creating this new majority alliance that pulls off this impressive blindside, but is also the best position within that, to where he is a part of the pound with the guys of the group, Joseph, Monty, and Turner, these big physical competitive guys, but also is aligned with Michael and Brittany, who are definitely no slouches on their own, but are also people who has a very good relationship within the game. So I feel like through that, Kyle is very well set up right now. And plus, on top of that, the leftovers have been able to ride on the radar, where despite the fallout happening from the Amira backdoor, it doesn't seem like any attention is going towards Kyle right now. And in fact, Kyle still has his relationship with Alyssa, who is currently on the outs right now, and is still interested in him, like kind of romantically, but also in terms of sharing information. Now, I will say that could kind of be cut off like in a bit due to him not really being interested in a showman's. It really does come down to how he handles that situation that could get into some trouble. However, for looking at the big picture, I feel like he is the best position in the game right now. And I do have to give him a ton of credit for creating this new power structure that's able to essentially flip the game on Amira and Jasmine, to where he is able to assume a lot of control here. So I do have to give Kyle a lot of credit for that. And because of that, I do feel like he's in a very strong position to do well. I mean, he hasn't won any competitions yet, but he definitely has the capability of doing so. And the fact that he hasn't won any yet does lead to him being a bit of a smaller threat in the game. And I feel like even the bigger perceived competitive people like Joseph and Monty are going to be targeted over him, as well as Michael, who has actually won a lot of competitions at this point. So because of that, I'm feeling pretty strong about Kyle right now. And because of that, he is here at number 1. And there we go. That will do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps out with the channel. Of course, I'll be back again next week to update the power rankings again, so we'll see about that. Survivor SA is currently happening, and oh boy, quite a bit is happening over there. That's pretty fun. I'm doing power rankings for that as well. And also be sure to join the Discord server if you haven't already. Link to join is in the description. A lot of stuff coming your way. But for now, that is the video. See ya.